Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are wandering into a wind-blown, God-forsaken desert, a place so quiet it forgets its own name. There's no breeze anymore, not really just the low moan of rocks being shaved thin by time. Heat ripples off the earth like it's trying to escape. In the distance, a mirage stutters into existence and then unexists. You are already sweating, even though the sun went down hours ago. Somewhere out there, something is buried. Something with a skull that remembered rain long after the sky forgot how to give it. And yes, before we begin, no, you probably won't survive. If the dehydration doesn't get you, the hallucinations will. That's not sarcasm. This is a story about a creature built to outthirst a desert. You're just a mammal with sweaty armpits and zero patience. Good luck! So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious who else is up this late. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You shuffle along the edge of a salt pan the size of a dried-up ocean, your boots kicking up little puffs of white dust that cling to your skin like guilt. It's late, but still hot enough to cook canned beans if you left them out. You try not to breathe too deeply. There's a weird scent in the air. Not death. Older than that, like someone boiled fossils in a rusted kettle. Then, ahead of you, something breaks the pattern of the cracked earth. It's not sharp, not angular. It doesn't scream dinosaur in the way pop culture has trained your eyes to look for. It's more like a domed stone, half buried, half whispering. You slow down. The shape has a kind of symmetry to it, ridges where wind has sculpted dust into delicate lines. And something about it makes your teeth itch. You kneel, press your fingers against it. It hums. Not loudly. It's not a noise so much as a pressure. Like standing under power lines, but the electricity's forgotten it's supposed to zap you. Your bones register it before your ears do. It's subtle, but it's there like thunder at the bottom of a pool. You brush away more sand. The ridges become clearer. They aren't random. This is no rock, this is bone. Skull, to be specific. And not just any skull. This one has strange hollow chambers above the eyes and deep nasal passages that coil like a conch shell's interior. You've seen diagrams like this before. You just can't remember where. As you work, a gust of hot air lifts a curtain of dust around you, and for a second, the skull looks like it's exhaling. The fossil record out here is notoriously stingy. Most desert fossils are shattered, scattered, and sun-bleached until they resemble pottery shards. But this one's nearly whole. And it's wrong in the best way. A factual side note for you. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. About 7,000 years ago, it was green lush, full of rivers, hippos, and early human artists who painted giraffes on cave walls. Today, not so much. You're in the loneliest sandbox the planet has to offer. Back to the skull. You notice that it's tilted slightly upward toward the sky, not forward like most animals that sniff along the ground. It's as if this creature lived with its nose always lifted, hoping, expecting, or maybe listening for something. You sit down just for a moment, just to rest. Time passes oddly in the desert. Your thoughts start unraveling in long, soft strips. The skull hums again, maybe it never stopped. And you start to think, what if this fossil remembers rain? What if its very shape was designed to hold echoes, to trap pressure waves in the same way a shell traps the sea? The idea sounds ridiculous. Except it doesn't. Historians still debate whether ancient nomads believed bones carried weather spirits. Some desert tribes whispered that fossils were the knuckles of sleeping gods. Others simply buried them again out of fear they were unfinished creatures who might wake up thirsty. You laugh once dry, humorless. The kind of laugh you make when you realize your water bottle is half empty and your phone signal is a philosophical concept. The joke writes itself. You're lost in the desert, kneeling before a skull that hums, and you're wondering if it remembers storms better than you remember where the truck is. Here's an odd fact to chew on. While your brain cooks, camels can drink up to 40 gallons of water in one go, but they don't store it in their humps. Those are fat reserves, their true superpower. Incredibly efficient noses that trap water vapor from their breath, almost like a living air conditioner. You squint at the fossil. Now, you're wondering if this dinosaur, whoever it was, had evolved something similar but more extreme. Something skull-deep, something ancient. Your fingers itch to dig out more. Not just the fossil. The truth. You start pulling away layers of sand like you're peeling a scab each handful, bringing you closer to whatever this creature used to be. Your heartbeat syncs with the skull's imagined rhythm. You forget to be afraid, you forget to hydrate, you forget time. And that's how these stories start, isn't it? Not with a monster, not with a roar, but with a question humming under your fingertips. You don't sleep. Not really. Just sort of fold yourself into the sand beside the fossil and pretend time isn't real. The wind drops to nothing, not even a whisper now. The skull has taken over all sound in the area. It's not loud again, more like the subtle pressure you feel in your ears before a storm breaks, except there's no storm. You run your hand over its surface again, tracing the shallow grooves where time has etched stories you're not qualified to read. It's not smooth, not entirely. Pitted here and there. Delicate bumps, like the echo of old vascular channels, as if the skull once held something warm. Wet, necessary. You get the sense this thing didn't just belong to something alive, it was alive in its own way. It's too complex, too deliberate, too quiet. You clear more sand and find the rear crest. It curves backward like a scoop hollowed at the top. No teeth, no sign of a predator, no eye ridges meant for hunting. It's the kind of face that belongs to something that just walked, watched, waited. The kind of face designed for survival in a place that does not negotiate. And as you stare into one of the empty orbits, that's when you feel it again. The hum. But this time it's not just humming, it's vibrating softly. Not constant, just occasional pulses like something inside the skull is remembering how to be awake. The pressure in your ears sharpens. It's like holding a seashell, but the sound's coming from under your ribcage instead of your hand. You glance up at the sky. Still clear, still black, still star-smeared and heartless, but something is changing. A shimmer rolls across the horizon. Not movement, not quite, just a gentle distortion in the starlight, like heat waves but colder, slower. You stand up, back away, and then for just a moment you see something impossible. A ripple? A ghost image. A shadow thing walking upright, tall, slow, rhythmic. Broad hips, forward knees, long sweeping tail. Its head held high, skull angled up like a priest waiting for a reply from the clouds. The shape flickers in and out like static on an ancient TV screen. It isn't there, but it was, and that's enough to undo you a little. You drop back into the sand and bury your hands in it just to feel something solid, something that isn't dreaming back at you. Odd fact for the hour. The desert is full of illusions, not just visual ones. Acoustic mirages are a thing, sound that bends through layers of air density and temperature. Sometimes you'll hear footsteps that belong to no one. Sometimes a voice. Sometimes music. And sometimes they say you'll hear thunder where there are no clouds. You look back at the fossil. It doesn't care about you, doesn't need you, but it's holding you here like gravity with secrets. This is what you piece together. Long ago, very long, there was something that walked this place. Not ran, not hunted, just moved, with a skull like a satellite dish. But it wasn't listening to prey or danger. It was listening up. Scientists argue over what exactly it was. Some say it's a desert-specific hadrosaurid related to creatures like Lambeosaurus, with a cranial crest used for low-frequency sound resonance. Others say no, this was a unique lineage with cranial adaptations not for sound, but for pressure. Barometric sensitivity, a kind of storm-sensing dinosaur. Historians still debate whether it was evolutionary luck or some deeper sensory function. Did the skull merely resonate with air pressure, or did it somehow remember it? We don't know. But the creature walked with its head up always. You'd imagine it now. A dinosaur taller than a camel, maybe 25 feet long, with wide shovel-like feet for dune walking, and a gait that stirred very little dust. The skull was thick but airy like a sponge made of bone. Long nasal passages curled inward like an antique woodwind instrument. And here's the strange part: every time storms came close but never broke, this creature still responded. It tilted its head, adjusted its posture, began moving toward the nearest low-pressure pocket, sometimes for miles. Not chasing rain, no. Chasing memory of rain. The echo of it. The shape of what could have fallen. And sometimes, rarely, the storm would want to fall. But the desert air was so dry, so hostile that the rain would evaporate before it hit the sand. Scientists call this virga. Rain that never makes it home. So this creature, this dinosaur with the hollow skull, it adapted. It learned how to drink vapor. It learned how to meet the rain halfway. You sit with that. Your throat is dry. You take the last sip from your bottle and feel the irony carve a little trench in your dignity. What kind of animal could smell a storm before it started? What kind of creature could remember water so vividly that it evolved a skull that echoed with its sound? What kind of thing walks because it hopes? The wind kicks up again. The skull vibrates sharper now. You hear it more clearly. A tone so low it sits behind your ears. You swear it's shaping itself into something almost familiar. Not language, not a song. Just the beginning of both. You look at it again. It hasn't moved. But somehow it knows you're thirsty. You wake up with sand in your teeth and a sunburn in the shape of curiosity. The skull hasn't moved, not that it could, but it looks slightly different in morning light. More deliberate. More designed. You blink, stretch, and feel your spine pop like a series of regretful bubble wraps. The desert has a way of aging you overnight. And then you remember the hum. You press your ear to the side of the fossil again. Nothing, not yet. But now you know what you're looking for, and that's always worse. You whisper to it something stupid, probably, a joke, a dare. What the hell were you? Because now you want answers, and what the skull gives you isn't language, isn't noise, it's a shape. In your mind. Hollow curves and chambers, a slow inhale through long coiled passages, something built not just to sense storms, but to feel them like ribs. Feel laughter. The design becomes clearer the longer you stare. This skull didn't just exist, it listened. Not to its environment like a predator. Not for footsteps or screeches. This thing was tuned to the sky itself. It had chambers, tubes, subtle bone flanges, and ridges that would have created echo paths for sound and air pressure. Think of it like a weather instrument that wore feet, a walking barometer with a pulse, and a nose. A very weird nose. Odd fact for your day. Human sinuses may have evolved to help us cool our brains. They're like internal air conditioners lined with mucus. Elegant, sexy. Now imagine that, but 20 times larger, twisted like a nautilus, and adapted for heat, wind, and moisture management across a face 6 feet long. That's what this dinosaur's skull did. It's not just for display, not just for species recognition or weird crests to honk mating calls. The skull of this desert walker had narrow, labyrinth-like nasal passages. Not straight tunnels, but spirals, sharp curves, condensation zones. Histologists suggest these bone curves had special textures, micro-ridges, and salt crystals that wicked moisture out of the air as it passed through. Basically, it breathed in desert wind and wrung water from it. Scientists still debate whether this creature evolved these traits because of a long-term drought event or because it migrated into a region where cloud shadows taunted but rarely delivered. Either way, it adapted. It didn't ask the world to change. It changed itself to hear what others ignored. The skull's upper dome is unusually smooth in one region. You run your hand over it again. There's a slight dip like a bowl. You can imagine water pooling there just for a second. Long enough to matter. Maybe rain never reached the ground, but when it clung to the air just above it, this thing met it halfway, like someone holding their hands out to catch a whisper. This is where it gets stranger. We don't know if this dinosaur drank the water directly. Maybe it dripped backward into the throat. Maybe it collected in a throat pouch like pelicans do today. Or maybe it didn't drink it at all. Maybe it just stored it for temperature regulation for scent tracking, or maybe even for singing. Yeah, you heard me. There's a theory fringe but charming that these dinosaurs could play their skulls like woodwinds, that the hollow chambers resonated at subsonic levels, not to communicate, not to scream, but to sync, to vibrate in harmony with passing weather. You imagine that now. A quiet chorus of desert beasts humming with the wind, not to call each other but to tune themselves to the world. Like monks, or maybe just giant sweaty flutes. And here's your academic wildcard of the day. Historians still debate whether this dinosaur's crested skull was a passive system or an active one. Was it just shaped by chance to hum with storms, or did it evolve with intent, with purpose to attract, to amplify, to interact with the environment? We don't know, but here's what we do know. Bone is not just scaffolding. It's expressive. It adapts to pressure, sound, heat, movement. Over generations, it becomes a message, not in words, in shapes. You sit back, squint into the sky, cloudless, always cloudless. You think about how terrifying it must have been to live in a world that promised water from above but rarely delivered, and still to have evolved a skull that bent toward hope. That heard the shape of the storm. That didn't beg but anticipated. There's an old human myth that if you whistle into a bottle at the right angle, the sky will cry. This feels like that, except scaled up and fossilized. Here's a light joke before your brain dries out completely. If humans had evolved the same way, you'd be walking around with skulls shaped like rain buckets and noses that whistled every time the barometric pressure dropped. You'd be very annoying, but at least your forehead wouldn't be so dry. You get up and walk a slow circle around the skull. You can almost see the whole creature now, broad-hipped, thick-necked, not fast, not aggressive, just built to outlast, not a predator, not prey, just something that needed the sky to notice it every once in a while. You place your palm gently on the highest point of the fossil dome, and there it is again, the hum, just one note. Long, low, like a cello underwater. A reminder that something once walked here listening harder than anything alive. You follow it, not literally. There's nothing alive to follow, but something in your spine has aligned with the shape of that fossil skull, and now your feet move like they remember something you don't. You're walking slowly westward maybe, or south, or just down the slope of a dune that wasn't here yesterday. The skull is behind you, but the idea of it isn't. That part clings like static on your skin. The ground gets softer, powder fine in some places like flour that's forgotten how to bake. And suddenly you're not alone. No, it's not people. Worse. Tracks. One set. Huge. Each footprint is about the size of your torso, and shallow, like something wide and careful, pressed just enough to be polite, then lifted again. They aren't deep gouges like a theropod's or mammoth prints with that proud heel curve. These are slow, flat, deliberate. Walking, not charging. Each step slightly offset, as if the body that made them swayed side to side, a beast born into balance with something larger than itself. You imagine it again, tall, long, elegant in the way sand is elegant when it dances. A dinosaur walking in the desert, not from thirst, but for it. Head high, skull tilted, listening. Every few steps it pauses, waits, adjusts its course ever so slightly like a needle swerving toward a magnet only it can feel. Odd fact to spice up your slow descent into madness: vultures can smell rotting meat from over a mile away using a specialized olfactory bulb. Some turkey vultures have larger olfactory centers than eagles have eyes. Now flip that. Instead of death, imagine something evolved to smell pressure, to feel shifts in temperature gradients and micro-humidity. That's the dinosaur you're following. It's as if the creature didn't live with the desert. It negotiated with it. You kneel in one of the prints. The sand here is cooler shaded by the shallow depression. It's a stupid thing, but it feels safe, like the echo of a shelter. You close your eyes and hear nothing but the sound of your own pulse, and then, just briefly, the memory of thunder. Not the noise, the promise of it. Historians still debate whether this species ever migrated or if it remained entirely stationary within certain storm paths. Some believe it was a nomadic barometer traveling based on invisible forecasts, keeping to the ghost trails of evaporated rivers. Others argue it stayed put, letting the storms come to it if they dared. Either way, this thing walked with thunder in its mouth. The skull you found, that was just the casing. The creature itself carried a storm engine. Not one that produced rain, but one that tuned itself to where rain might be. Imagine living in such hope that your whole head became a divining rod. That every breath you took filtered dust through spiraled sinuses, not just to survive, but to predict. Here's your joke before this all gets too mystical. If modern humans had the same adaptation every time someone opened a weather app, their forehead would fog up and their sinuses would whistle the theme from The X-Files. Climate anxiety would become literal resonance. Office meetings during overcast days would be a nightmare. You're walking again, still tracing those prints. They're fading fast, half crushed by dunes reshuffling in the breeze. But you're not really following the prints now. You're following what they meant. This wasn't random wandering. The creature knew where to go. The skull was a compass, the legs were patient, and the rest of the body was just there to keep the skull moving forward. In a weird way, you kind of envy it. It had one job: find the storm. Even if the storm never wanted to be found. Even if the storm lied. You pause at the edge of a slope. Below, in a flat basin, there are more tracks. Smaller, scattered. Shapes that suggest lizards. Birds. Mammals, maybe. All of them following the same broad path like shadows tailing a giant. And just like that, the idea blooms in your mind. What if other creatures followed it? What if it didn't just wander? What if it led? That's a concept that gives paleontologists night sweats. Because leading implies intention. Intention implies social structure. And now you're spiraling. Was it a silent oasis? A moving cloud chaser that other animals shadowed for days hoping for condensation, or scraps of leaf pulled from higher elevations? Did they wait for it to kneel and tip its skull so they could lick the runoff from the air-dented ridges? Did it know? Was it kind, or was it just inevitable? You walk for hours. You find nothing more than sand and silence and the occasional broken beetle wing. But your brain won't shut up. It keeps reshaping this creature in your mind not as a freak or a fossil, but as a presence. Something with tempo. With rhythm. A dinosaur that lived like a tuning fork in the middle of nowhere. And then just before dusk, you crest a low dune and stop. In the valley below is a line of shallow ancient indentations, like craters made by soft fists. You count them. 12. All aligned in a slow arc, a curve that turns gently toward the distant mountains. You know, without knowing, this is where it turned. The rain must have shifted, and so did it. And now so do you. You descend into the curve like you're stepping into a sentence mid-thought. The footprints are ancient, barely there, but they hold shape in a way that suggests the desert chose to remember them. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of love. You walk their arc with slow feet, not because you're tired, but because it feels rude to rush here. The wind has gone quiet again, and with it, your thirst is louder. That's when you finally understand what made this creature unique. It wasn't just built to drink rain. It was built to drink what almost was to intercept the promise of water in the moments before it died in the air. The desert plays a nasty trick, you know. Sometimes clouds roll low across the sky like gods on their elbows, and then nothing. Not a single drop hits the sand. The moisture falls and vanishes midair like it's ashamed to touch you. Scientists call this virga, a rain ghost, a half-promise. But to a skull like that, one virga was enough. Because it never waited for water to reach the ground. That dinosaur intercepted it mid-drop. Skull tilted, nostrils wide, eyes half-lidded in some kind of trance, walking through clouds that never landed, just brushing through the mist, with skin and bone tuned to absorb the fleeting. Odd fact. In modern times, red kangaroos in Australia have been observed licking dew off their own forearms to hydrate when temperatures reach unbearable highs. Not drink, not soak, lick. Adaptation doesn't ask if it's pretty, it asks if it works. Now, imagine a creature whose entire skull functioned like a sponge mid-air. No dew, just atmospheric tension. It didn't need rivers, it needed suggestion. You walk the curve until it flattens out, and there you pause. The sand here is darker, compact. Maybe rain did fall here once. Maybe this spot was sacred not because it quenched thirst, but because it almost did. The skull, you now realize, was the perfect tool for this ecosystem. A barometer, a filter, and a sacrament. It didn't just process wind, it refined it. The nostrils were elongated and narrow-shaped to maximize exposure to air with high moisture content. As that air passed through the winding nasal passages, temperature differentials and surface textures caused condensation to form. It's the same principle as the inside of a cold glass fogging up, but this glass had bones and walked uphill. Salt ridges inside the skull drew out every last drop. Capillaries lined with mineralized edges wrung vapor into liquid. From there, it trickled down into storage cavities, small hollows behind the eyes or inside the cheeks, like camel humps, but secret. Quiet. Historians still debate whether these internal storage pockets were used solely for hydration, or if they also served thermoregulation or mating displays. Some fossils suggest asymmetric skull structures, one side larger, more hollow than the other. Was this genetic drift, or a feature, or a flaw? You'll never know, but the idea lingers, doesn't it? A dinosaur that didn't just want rain, but outsmarted the lack of it. That evolved a head so absurdly complex it didn't need rivers, lakes, or puddles. Just a moment in the right pressure pocket. You stare up at the sky again. Clouds today, for once, thin, wispy, pretending they don't want to weep. They pass silently overhead, casting shadows that the desert refuses to believe in. You imagine the creature again, alone maybe, or in a loose group of others like it. Heads all cocked to the same angle, eyes closed, walking sideways into a wind laced with moisture. Every few moments, one stops, exhales slowly, and collects the mist clinging to its nostrils like kisses from a ghost. You think about how it must have felt, not just the survival part, the sensation of it, moisture forming inside a dry skull. A low vibration of pressure change behind the eyes. Relief, not in gulps or splashes, but in the slow bloom of enough. And here's your required joke to break the spell. If humans had evolved this way, first dates would involve synchronized breathing near humidifiers. You'd go to the botanical garden not to smell flowers but to absorb the atmosphere nose first. Honestly, you'd be weird but hydrated. You smile to yourself, but it fades. Because now you're wondering what happened when it didn't work. When the pressure dropped but the air stayed dry. When the clouds teased but the moisture never condensed. Did the dinosaur stand still, skull humming in frustration? Did it change course? Did it learn to read failure? You think maybe that's why the footprints curved, not to follow rain, but to escape its absence. The prints you're following don't go straight. They arc like the creature was trying to dodge something, or like it circled one last time hoping the signal would return. Maybe it never did. You walk a few more paces and notice something odd, a depression in the sand broader than the others. Not a footprint. A kneeling place. The marks are shallow, wide, like a body rested here briefly, or knelt, or gave up. You kneel in it now. The ground is cool beneath your knees. You tilt your head up, and for just a moment you swear something cold brushes your cheek. It's not water, but it could have been. You stay kneeling for longer than you should. Maybe because the sand here feels slightly different, more compressed, like something rested its impossible weight against the world and left an emotional dent. Or maybe it's because the air really is thicker. Not with moisture, don't get your hopes up, but with memory. You press your hand into the sand again. It's not just cool, it's sticky. Not wet, not exactly, but textured in a way that sand shouldn't be unless something unnatural happened here. Or something clever. You lean closer to the depression and dig with your fingers, sifting through the fine grains until you find them traces of blackened mineral streaks along the underside of the basin. Not rock, not ash, salt. It hits you. The skull didn't just sense rain, it condensed it. This thing wasn't waiting around with an open mouth. It had infrastructure. You sit back and try to put the pieces together with your heat-softened brain. The skull's internal passages, the ridges along the snout, the tightly coiled nasal tubes. None of it was random. It was an active system, a wind trap, a moisture farm. It inhaled the desert and exhaled drinkable hope. Odd fact: certain beetles in the Namib Desert climb to the top of dunes at night and raise their backs to collect condensation from fog which rolls into their mouths. They survive in one of the driest places on Earth, not through brute force but sheer elegance. This dinosaur was a beetle scaled up and tuned to a lower frequency. It didn't fight the desert, it tricked it. You turn your focus to the skull's nostrils, wide at the tip but narrow inside. Not for scent, for efficiency. Air passed through like a whisper swirling against moist bone ridges, and something inside capillary-lined tissue maybe coaxed vapor out of it. If the wind was heavy enough, if the barometric pressure dropped just right, the internal temperature of the nasal passages caused microcondensation to form. Now imagine that happening over hours, every breath collecting just a little, enough to keep the blood wet, enough to not die. It didn't drink rain, it took it apart. The condensed water gathered in little sacs behind the eye's vascular reservoirs. Think of them as cheek canteens, protected by bones, shaded from heat, cooled by airflow and strategic blood vessel placement. It wasn't just survival, it was an ecosystem in a face. Historians still debate whether this kind of moisture condensation evolved as a response to climate catastrophe or as a slow generational arms race with the air itself. Did the dinosaurs' ancestors once have access to actual water sources? Rivers, swamps, or seasonal lakes that dried up over centuries? Or did it emerge fully adapted from the start, born into a dry silence with tools already forged? You stand up, brushing the sand from your knees, and glance backward. The skull where you found it is barely visible now. Just a soft dome on the horizon. But your mind overlays it with what you now know: chambers, coils, ridges, and vents. Not for noise, not for beauty, but for war. A biological war against dryness, against disappointment, against the sky's indifference. And here's your moment of humor before the sun bleaches it all away. If this dinosaur had existed in the modern world, it'd be the friend who brings their own hydration system to music festivals. Skull full of electrolyte fog, drinking the crowd's breath and side-eyeing your plastic water bottle like a loser. A true vapor influencer. You start walking again, slower now. Your throat is dry, your legs ache, and there's a weird itch under your scalp that might be dehydration or just the creeping sense that you're learning something your species forgot. Maybe that's what this place is, not a graveyard, a school. The curve of the trail leads you toward an outcropping stone, not sand. A low shelf of rock partially covered in dust. You climb it without ceremony and find something you didn't expect. More skulls. Smaller, not full skeletons, just fragments. Some broken, some nearly whole. All of them shaped differently from the one you found. Different sizes, different ridges. A few with almost floral structures rising from the dome, petal-like bone flares with tiny holes along their edges. They're not decorations, they're vents. This wasn't a one-off freak, it was a species. And now you're staring at a fossil nursery. Here's the kicker. The young ones had more elaborate bone structures than the adults. It's backwards. Usually juveniles are simpler, lighter, faster growing. But not these. Their skulls were more intricate with tighter spirals and extra bony curls. Why? Scientists argue about it. Some say it was an adaptation to trap even more moisture when young bodies needed it most. Others think it was social signaling evolving out of necessity and into ritual. The truth is probably both. Nature doesn't like to choose. You kneel by one fragment. The ridge is delicate, almost scalloped with a line of mineralized veins running along the inner curl. You imagine a baby dinosaur lifting its head into the wind skull, humming slightly as moisture gathered along those ridges, feeding it drop by drop in a world that gave nothing for free. Did they teach each other? Did the young learn from the old? Did they tilt their heads the same way upward defiant quietly? You stay there for a long time. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because you can't shake the image. A herd of bone-faced dinosaurs walking through fog that never touches the ground, humming softly to each other. Heads full of air and skulls full of rain. You leave the fossil nursery with your steps gentled, like someone just whispered not to wake the past. The ridge behind you feels watched not by ghosts but by memory itself. A silence so ancient it doesn't care what you believe. A lullaby for the sand. You shuffle downhill, tracing the arc of footprints that continue beyond the rock. But now you're thinking differently. You're not just following the big one, you're following them. The old, the young, the ones who sang to the air and drank fog through their bones. And now comes the most unsettling part. They didn't carry water in their bellies. They carried it in their skulls. That's a sentence you don't expect to think in the 21st century. But here you are miles from anything that plugs into a wall, trying to visualize what it must have felt like to store liquid above your eyes while crossing the hottest place on Earth. The anatomy was strange but efficient. Behind the eye socket inside what would have looked like just decorative bone to the untrained eye, there were vascular hollows, chambers lined with spongy tissue and surrounded by sinus-like structures. Think of it like having your own mobile water bottle inside your face. Disgusting. A little genius, absolutely. These reservoirs weren't large, but they were temperature-controlled. The bone ridges surrounding them served as a heat shield, dispersing sunlight and creating thermal gradients. When the sun hit, heat followed the ridges and moved away from the eye sockets, protecting the stored water from evaporation. Even your modern-day fancy vacuum flasks can't brag about that kind of design. This dinosaur skull, it was Yeti before Yeti was cool. Odd fact for your skull pondering. Camels famous for desert survival don't sweat much. Instead, their brains are cooled by a network of blood vessels called the rete mirabile, which act like a sponge. This keeps their brains safe while the rest of the body gets borderline crispy. Same principle here, except this dinosaur cooled its water, not its thoughts. You pause on a flat section of dune and crouch to rest. There's a rock there, warm but not burning. Your hand presses into it absent-mindedly, and you find another one of those salt streaks along the base. Not spilled water, fossilized condensation runoff. Maybe once, just once, rain did land. Just enough to trickle down the skull and drip from those facial ridges, pooling in little traps just below the eyes. And the creature held it there, not sloshing, not wasteful. It used muscle contractions around the eyes to press inward slowly, pushing the water down toward the mouth. A drip system. Controlled. Metered. You can almost hear it in your head. Now push, pause, swallow. Like the world's slowest sip. Historians still debate whether this behavior was voluntary or instinctive. Did the dinosaur choose when to release the water? Did it feel thirst? Or was it more like a timer? An automatic system set by internal chemistry. You stare at the horizon. You want to believe it was conscious, not just for the poetry, for the strategy. Imagine this. The dinosaur walking through a desert storm cloud, its skull vibrating with low atmospheric frequencies, moisture, condensing inside its nasal coils, trickling towards storage behind its eyes. Hours later, the wind is dry again, but its head is full of cool droplets. It doesn't rush to drink. It waits, conserves, times it for when it needs it most, and just maybe it shares. Yeah, now we're going off script, but stick with me. What if these dinosaurs weren't entirely selfish with their stored rain? You've already followed tracks of smaller creatures trailing behind. What if this beast carrying water in its face paused every now and then, tilted its skull low and let a drop fall? Not for itself, but for others. That kind of behavior has precedent. Elephants have been observed digging water holes and then stepping aside as birds, turtles, and smaller mammals drink first. It's not charity. It's ecosystem sense. The big survive longer when the little survive too. Now, picture it a dinosaur standing still. As smaller animals dart forward one drop, two lapping up rain that didn't fall from the sky but from the hollow behind an ancient eye. And here's your joke to soften the existential beauty. If you had this ability today, office water coolers would become forehead bump stations. Hey Karen, mind tilting your head so I can top off my thermos? You laugh. Or you would if your lips weren't so cracked. You really should have brought more water. You keep walking, following the gentle slope of the land. There's no vegetation here, no signs of recent life. Just mineralized silence and those faint, evaporating clues in the ground. But your brain keeps spinning with the same idea: water that never touched the earth, collected, stored, and rationed above the mouth, hidden in bone. It's such an elegant defiance. Not of nature, but of despair. A creature so attuned to dryness that it evolved to preempt it. To intercept water in its invisible form and keep it not in the gut, not in the skin, but behind the eyes. A literal reservoir of foresight. You begin to see it now, not just the skull, but the culture. The rhythm. These weren't desperate survivors, they were artists of patience. Practitioners of delay, masters of minimalism, the monks of thirst. And when one of them finally died, the last thing to leave its skull wasn't thought or sight. It was moisture. You crest another rise and stop short. Not because you're tired, but because the sand below changes color. Just a little. A darker strip cutting across the lighter dune like a shadow that never learned how to fade. It's not a trick of the light. It's a trail. A ripple of compacted sand and ancient debris. Not fossilized bones. Lives. You descend slowly, feeling the weight of air thicken in your lungs, even though it hasn't rained in 10,000 years. Something about this place hums with congregation, with waiting. You crouch low and scan the ground, and sure enough, there they are. Tiny prints. Hundreds of them. Some lizard-shaped, splayed out like hands slapped in panic. Others tighter with padded toes and the inward push of cautious steps. A few drag marks as if a tail followed close or something even smaller was pulled along like a child refusing to move. And all of them follow the same line, toward the giant. The dinosaur you've been chasing, skull-tuned to vaporhead full of stored rain, wasn't alone. It was followed, constantly. Not by predators, not by parasites, but by pilgrims. You can almost hear it now. The slow, rhythmic footsteps of the massive dinosaur ahead, each one pressing a hymn into the sand, and behind it, a quieter, more desperate rustle. Reptiles, insects, early mammals maybe, all trailing the walking oasis, the water bearer, the moving condensation altar. Odd fact. In parts of Africa, desert elephants remember ancient watering holes and will lead entire herds to them across seemingly dead terrain. Other animals follow without hesitation, not because they understand why, but because elephants do. It was the same here. This dinosaur wasn't just a specialist. It was a beacon, and not for its species alone. You walk the trail, hands brushing past strange little burrows long since abandoned. One has the curled fossil of something mouse-like pressed against its inner wall spine. Arched skull still pointed toward where the dinosaur would have been. It died looking for water, or waiting for it. You pause and stare at the line of tracks. It's not straight. It weaves gently like a dried riverbed, graceful, not panicked. The smaller prints always stay just behind the large ones, never overlapping. Respectful distance, or maybe fear, or maybe awe. Here's where it gets eerie. You spot a second large footprint, not identical to the first dinosaurs. Slightly smaller, but similar shape, similar gait. Just off to the left, it follows the same curve and in places the prints overlap. They traveled together, at least for a while. Companionship, family, or just another seeker hearing the same song in the sky. Historians still debate whether dinosaurs exhibited communal behavior beyond herding. We know about nesting colonies and migration routes, but the idea of spiritual followership of ecological leadership still makes academics fidget in their swivel chairs. But what else do you call this? When smaller species organize their survival around the rhythm of a giant's walk. You sit down on a smooth patch of dune and think about the strange morality of it. This dinosaur didn't roar or conquer. It didn't dominate the ecosystem through fang or claw. It endured. And in doing so, it made others believe they might endure too. You wonder if it even noticed them. The insects clinging to its shadow, the rodents mimicking its steps, the birds nesting under its rib shadow when it paused for breath. Did it ever slow down for them? Or was it just living its own strange existence, unaware that the entire desert was quietly following its thirst? You laugh dry and cracked. If humans had this trait, you say aloud, we'd have people walking around with humidifier helmets and everyone else trailing behind like a pack of dehydrated groupies. Yoga moms with portable cloud hats. Influencers who store mist in their eyebrows. But the thought fades quickly. Because this wasn't fashionable. It was ritual. You look at one particularly well-preserved cluster of prints. There's a clear pause in the steps. A circle forms a spiraling pattern of little feet turning inward. At the center is a shallow depression barely an inch deep, and in it a single glint. You dig gently and find it. A fossilized beetle wing, still iridescent, still perfect. You hold it between your fingers. It must have fallen here when the creature stopped. Maybe to rest, maybe to tilt its skull toward the clouds and draw out what little moisture the air could give. And in that pause, the others gathered. This spot, this little indentation in the dust was a moment, a gathering, maybe something even sacred. The dinosaur stopped. The skull held water. And the others came close. Not to steal, not to fight, but to wait. Because sometimes one drop is enough. One drop to say, keep going. You wipe the sand off your hands and breathe in. Still dry, still lifeless. But something lingers in your mouth like the ghost of humidity. Or maybe it's just the taste of a story you were never meant to know. You turn and in the low light your own shadow stretches long. For a second it lines up with the trackway you're head at the end of a caravan that began millions of years ago. And for just that heartbeat you are part of it. A follower, a witness, a dry body hoping to catch a single drop. You wake up mid-thought again. The desert does that. It messes with your hours, your sense of hunger, your belief that time only flows forward. There's no wind this morning, not even a stir. The sand has gone glassy in places, its surface hardened overnight into tiny crusts that crunch beneath your fingers as you sit up. The fossil trail continues ahead, barely visible now, but your mind isn't on tracks anymore. It's on endings. Because the trail's beginning is long gone beneath dunes and erosion, but its end, that might be close. You feel it in your chest like pressure shifting again. Not air pressure this time. Narrative pressure. The kind that builds when something large, slow, and sacred has to die. You keep walking, but now you're searching the sky more than the ground. That's when you realize something haunting the trail curves again. Gently at first, then more sharply, like the creature made a deliberate spiral. Not to avoid something, not to find something, but to end something. It circled. On purpose. Not many animals do that. Dying animals usually hide, crawl away, vanish quietly into shade. But this one, it turned its own body into a spiral. One full circle, maybe more, imprinting its own passage into the earth like a fingerprint that no storm could wipe clean. At the center, you find it. A depression in the sand wider than the others. No skeleton, no bones. But the ground is heavier here. Heavier with intent. You kneel in the middle. Trace your fingers in slow arcs over the fossil memory of where it knelt. Because that's what it did. This dinosaur, this massive sky listener, knelt to die. Odd fact: elephants, when sensing their own death, often go still and quiet. Some kneel, some sway in slow circles. Herds have been observed returning to the bones of old elephants, brushing them with trunks, standing silent. There are no known dinosaur herds that did this, but maybe that's just because bone doesn't preserve grief. You lie flat on your stomach in the sand, staring into the shallow basin, and try to understand the ritual. The skull would have faced upward, angled to the sky, even in its final breath. Not flopped sideways like most creatures that collapse. No. This thing died on purpose. It died pointing. Historians still debate whether this kind of behavior was accidental or ceremonial. Some argue the spiral pattern is just a product of fatigue death loops made by a body too weak to continue. But others, the brave ones, suggest something else. That it was a gesture, a signal, a goodbye. You imagine it now. The dinosaur realizing its last moisture reserves have drained. The head heavy with memory, the lungs no longer humming. It turns slowly in a circle, mapping one last storm that never came. Then it kneels carefully, not in pain, but in choreography. A death shaped like a question mark. You find something brittle in the sand. A fragment of skull ridge, thin, feathered at the edge like it shattered quietly, not violently. You pick it up and hold it against the light. It looks like a wind chime piece. You want to blow across it and hear if it still sings. It doesn't, but your ears ring anyway, because your body can't accept that something so tuned to the sky could die waiting for it. Here's your joke, and it's a soft one. If this dinosaur had an obituary, it'd read, "Died doing what he loved," staring at weather that ignored him. A tragic icon. The meteorological martyr. A creature who kept his head in the clouds and never got rained on. You smile, but it fades too quickly, because now you feel the absence. Not just of the dinosaur, but of what it meant. This skull wasn't just hardware. It was ceremony, a temple shaped like bone. Every breath a ritual. Every tilt of the head a prayer. You walk the spiral once barefoot now, tracing the loops inward. It's not wide. 40 feet across at most, but it feels planetary. A small orbit carved into the surface of a place that has no time for orbit. You remember earlier how other animals followed it. You wonder if they gathered here, watched it kneel, watched it go still. And then, what? Did they scatter? Did they stay? Did they try to drink from the skull one last time? You reach the center again and sit, cross-legged. The fossil ridge fragment rests on your lap like an offering. Your breathing slows. The air is dry, but it doesn't burn like it used to. Maybe you've gone numb, or maybe the memory of that skull still carries trace moisture. Psychological hydration. You close your eyes and see it clearly now. The creature's body still, sand piling up around its flanks. Eyes closed, but nostrils flaring gently in the last faint pulse of instinct. Skull tilted, always tilted, because even in death it was listening. And the sky didn't cry, because by then it didn't have to. The dinosaur had already caught its last drop up there in its cathedral of a skull and carried it home. You don't move for a long while. The spiral holds you in place not by force, but by gravity of meaning. You could get up. You could walk away. But then what? The truck's probably a dozen dunes behind you. Your water's a memory. And the desert isn't done with you yet. You're in the middle of a grave, but not one dug. One drawn. And above you, still no clouds. You look up anyway, just like it did, and now the silence feels different. Less like emptiness, more like someone watching. Not haunting, just remembering. You stand eventually stretching like an old hinge and begin to walk along the outer edge of the spiral clockwise. Something about that direction feels right. You move slowly, eyes scanning the sand for something else, anything else that might be left behind. That's when the wind picks up. Not violently, not even urgently, just enough to lift a layer of sand and let you see the edge of something flat beneath it. You kneel again, brush gently. More carefully this time. It's not bone. It's the imprint of ribs. You gasp without meaning to. The body was here. Maybe still is buried deeper. But what you see now is the fossilized memory of breath-curved impressions where a rib cage once rose and fell, not sharp, not whole, but there, like wrinkles in a sheet that someone got up from long ago. Odd fact for the moment. In some desert regions, fossil preservation can happen faster than expected. Wind and salt and heat combine to create natural sarcophagi, not for centuries, but in decades. Things die, and their shapes cling to the sand like perfume on an old coat. You keep brushing. The ribs form a gentle cradle like someone sleeping on their side. And at the top, barely visible now, you spot a tiny channel in the sand. A groove carved by something that once trickled from the skull down to the mouth. A runoff path. It died leaking. Not blood, not breath. Water. The last of it easing from the inner chambers of the skull, guided by gravity and care. Maybe not a deluge, maybe not even a drip, but enough to mark the sand. Enough to show it happened. Historians still debate whether this runoff was part of a natural decompression event. Bone cavities relaxing as pressure faded or something else. A final release. A deliberate gesture of emptying, of letting go. You stare at that groove in the sand and feel your throat tighten, not from thirst this time, but from the weird ache of reverence. Because what kind of creature dies while making sure the last thing it carries returns to the world? That wasn't survival, that was ceremony. Here's your joke for balance. If humans stored water in their skulls, there'd be instructions on the side. Do not tilt upside down, hydrate responsibly, and contents may have settled during evolution. But this dinosaur didn't settle. It elevated, literally. Its skull lifted higher than its heart, defying efficiency. Every step an uphill reach toward the sky. Every breath filtered. Every drop a miracle. You stand again. The ribs vanish with one gust of wind. You hate that, but you also love it. Because it means the desert is keeping secrets, letting you see what it wants. Not more. You turn away, ready to walk back, but then your eye catches something odd on the horizon. The sand there looks different. Rippled. Not naturally, like something buried was resisting. You make your way toward it slow and deliberate, like someone following a drumbeat only they can hear. It's a ridge, a pile barely raised, and at its top, a fragment of crest, like the tip of a crown poking through a burial mound. Another skull. No, the skull. This wasn't where it died. This is where it was buried. You kneel and brush more carefully now. The sand parts easily, as if ashamed to be caught hiding something this important. The top dome is visible first. Still smooth, still curved. Wind-scoured but intact. Then the ridges. Then the long nasal coil spiraling gently down like a seashell wrapped in dust. And you realize this wasn't a burial by accident. It was a burial by storm. A massive sandstorm must have swept through after the dinosaur's final kneel. Maybe hours later, maybe days. And the wind, call it chance or grace, swept just enough sand to cover it. Not violently, not to erase, but to protect. You reach out and lay your hand flat against the skull's curve. It's warm, not from life, from sun, from the heat of the desert that forgot to hate this creature. Or maybe it didn't forget, maybe it chose. You press your ear to it like you did before, and for a second the hum returns, low, subtle, faint. Like someone somewhere is still talking through it, or listening. You whisper, "Thank you." Not because you think it hears you, but because something inside you has to say it. And then the wind shifts again. Soft this time. Not a storm, just a breeze. It brushes the sand off the skull in a way that feels gentle, like the desert is letting go, not of the bones, but of the silence. You stay beside the skull for longer than makes sense. The sun climbs and starts to blister the air into layers, heat stacked on heat distorting everything. But the skull holds your attention like a magnet holding metal shavings. You're not here for science anymore. You're here because something happened inside this bone. Something still is happening. You trace the edges of the exposed crest. Again, fingers careful not to chip anything. Beneath the surface, heat radiates, not blazing like the rocks around you, but warmer than it should be. You pause. Lay your palm flat. It's not your imagination. The fossil is holding warmth. You glance around. All the other bones, those brittle fragments you found earlier, are cold, even in this sun. But this one, there's a low, lingering warmth inside the skull. Not hot, not dangerous, just present. Like something had been sleeping in it, or like something still is. Odd fact. There are places on Earth like deep caves and sealed tombs where corpses preserve heat for far longer than you'd expect due to insulation, microbial activity, or mineral reactions. But this isn't a cave, this is open air. It should be bone cold. You press your other hand to the skull and feel it more clearly, a soft throb of heat concentrated around the sinus passages in that high dome. You can't explain it. You don't even try. You mutter, okay, that's weird. The fossil does not respond. But it doesn't have to, because that's when you remember the old reports. From a decade ago, a dig site nearby, just a ridge over. There had been a team of paleobiologists studying the thermal properties of fossil beds in this region. Mostly boring stuff. Diagenesis rates, preservation chemistry, blah, blah, blah. Except for one strange footnote that kept getting flagged and then dismissed. They recorded residual heat signatures inside certain skull fossils. Only the skulls. Never the ribs, never the limbs, just the heads. And only this kind, the long-crested, hollow-boned, pressure-sensing ones. Historians still debate whether it was the result of decayed microbial colonies, slow exothermic reactions in the fossil matrix, or simply solar insolation via mineral crystallization. But none of the theories hold, because the heat wasn't external. It was coming from inside the bone. You lean down and press your cheek to the skull. The warmth is real, subtle but undeniable. It pulses like a heartbeat from something too old to still be beating. Here's your unsettling joke of the day. If this were a horror movie, this would be the part where the skull opens its eyes, which would be impressive because skulls don't have eyes. But hey, Jurassic rules don't care. You sit up and shake the heat from your head. Dust off your jeans. Take one last deep breath, then another. Because this isn't just warmth, it's invitation. You don't know what you expect to find, but you start digging anyway, just a few inches deeper around the edge of the skull's dome. It resists at first, the sand packed tightly, but then it gives. Crumbles inward like a breath being held too long. Inside, more chambers, not hollow like you expected. Lined, textured. The interior isn't just fossilized, it's preserved. The ridges along the inner nasal cavity are still intact. Fine structures that should have shattered long ago. Delicate mineral striations that mimic vascular patterns. And at the very center, a cluster of fine crystal-like formations, spiraled tightly, glowing slightly where the sun strikes them. You blink. That's not normal. Crystals don't form like that inside fossils. You touch one. It's warm too, but not with heat, with resonance. Like when your phone vibrates gently on a wooden table humming a notification. You pull your hand back quickly, then press again. Still there, still humming. Not loud, not even audible, just pressure riding the edge of sense. Historians still debate whether this phenomenon, commonly called fossil whisper, is purely psychological. Some say the faint vibrations are the result of ambient sound trapped in bone lattice. Others argue it's wishful thinking, a subconscious projection onto ancient remains. But you're not imagining this. The skull remembers something. Maybe thunder, maybe breath, maybe the precise sound of atmospheric tension before water condenses. You don't know. But the resonance sits behind your eyes now, tugging at memory. Not yours. Theirs. The skull is humming like a tuning fork pressed to a dead radio station. And for the briefest moment you understand something terrifying and beautiful, it's still listening. Maybe not to storms anymore. Maybe not to pressure systems or vapor trails. But to you. Here's a final joke, because your brain needs the lifeline. If this fossil was a smart home device, it'd be Alexa. For the prehistoric age, except it doesn't take commands, it gives them. You step back, eyes wide. One last look at the crest. Then you whisper, "What are you trying to say?" No answer. But the wind kicks up again, rustling the sand in a slow spiral around your feet. Not a gust. Not a storm. Just shape. A suggestion. And the skull, it hums once more. This time deeper. And something inside you hums back. You spend the next few minutes or hours. Time here has become irrelevant, sitting cross-legged in the sand beside the skull. You don't touch it again. You just watch. You let it hum faint and steady like a song that refuses to finish. It's not trying to be heard. It's trying to stay. And you wonder if maybe that's what memory really is, not what we recall, but what refuses to leave. You speak aloud softly, like you're worried you'll spook it. Is it still in there? The skull doesn't answer, of course. But something shifts. A tiny vibration beneath your thigh. Faint enough to question. Strong enough to believe. You place your hand back on the ridge slowly now, with reverence. The warmth is there, but more than that, the pulse. Not like a heartbeat. That would be too generous, too human. This is something older, a fossil echo. And then comes the sound. Just a breath. A long, low exhale from the interior of the skull. Not wind. Not air pressure. Not a breeze squeezed through bone. It sounds like something trapped for too long is letting go. Or worse, like something just noticed you. You scramble back, fall onto your elbows, stare at the fossil with wide eyes and sand in your teeth. You wait. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. Just silence. A silence that somehow feels more populated than before. You whisper, "Okay, that's new." Odd fact. Certain rocks and deserts are known to emit low-frequency tones when heated rapidly. It's called thermal expansion resonance. Completely natural. Some say that's what causes the moaning sounds in sand dunes, the desert singing in its own way. But this wasn't that. This came from inside the skull. You sit again. This time with your back straight, pulse high, logic fading like mirages. You recall stories from earlier researchers. Whispers on old forums. Footnotes buried in grant reports. The phenomenon was known unofficially as the skull whisper. It was a joke at first. Then it became a rumor. Then it got someone fired. Because it didn't stay just acoustic. Some researchers, usually after long exposure, sleep-deprived in dig tents, reported that the fossils seemed to affect thought. Not with words, with rhythms. With strange recurring patterns that crept into dreams, into the edges of conversations. One paleontologist claimed the skull she was studying started tapping along with her breath. Not literally, not with movement, but with sync. Another swore that the dreams only stopped after she returned the fragment she'd brought home. Her dreams hadn't been violent, they'd just been dry, parched to the bone. Historians still debate whether these experiences are psychological artifacts, confirmation bias, or undiagnosed heat stroke. But the reports remain. Unpublished, unexplained, unforgotten. You reach into your pack for your notebook and find it warped from the heat. You open it anyway, flip to a clean page and begin sketching. Not the skull. What it heard. You draw spirals. Circles within circles. Not perfect. Not artistic. But the shape feels right. You shade one in darker than the others and label it center point of last rain. Then beside it, memory echo. Then, because your hand won't stop, you draw a simple cross-section of the skull's interior as best you remember. The nasal coils, the water traps, the chambers. You shade in the part that hummed. You pause. Then you write still warm. And underneath that, still aware, you close the notebook. Hold it against your chest like a secret. Because even though you know better, even though you believe in bones and time and scientific restraint, you also believe this. That skull didn't forget. It didn't fossilize into silence. It fossilized into attention. You sit a while longer chewing dry air listening for more. The hum doesn't return, not exactly. But now and then the wind moves differently near you like it's detouring around something invisible. And that's when you notice the sand. It's forming a faint spiral again. Nothing dramatic, no cinematic dust storm, just a tiny patient turn of grains in the air around the fossil, clockwise. Steady, as if the land is repeating something. You try to convince yourself it's coincidence. That's when your phone buzzes in your pocket. You forgot you had it. Dead, probably. But no, there it is. 1% battery, no signal. And yet, the voice recorder app is open. You didn't open it. At least you think you didn't. There's a single file saved time-stamped 20 minutes ago. You press play. Nothing. Then something. A low tone. Not like a voice, more like a vibration. Almost exactly the hum you felt through your hand. You drop the phone in the sand. No, you bury it. That part of the story is done. Here's your joke to cover the goosebumps. If this thing ever made a podcast, it'd be called Storm Inside My Head, updated once every 100 millennia, and mostly composed of deep sighs. You stand shaking off the sand. Look at the skull one last time. It's still just a fossil, still just bone, still just sitting there. But it's also not alone anymore, because now you carry it too. You don't go far. You try. You really do. But a dozen slow steps later, something tugs at your stomach, not a sharp pain, just a pressure, like forgetting something vital, like leaving the stove on in another life. You turn around. The fossil sits half buried behind you, half listening, still watching the sky. You sigh, walk back, and sit beside it once more. Not like before. Not reverent now, just honest. You lean your shoulder against the edge of the dome. You two are old friends at this point. You don't need to talk. But then you get a thought, one that digs in. What if it wasn't just water it stored? What if it remembered shapes, not memories like yours? Not faces or voices, but weather, pressure, tension, the curve of clouds that never opened, the compression of air just before it failed to weep, the exact pitch of a sky full of unspent rain. What if this skull didn't just carry rain? What if it carried the form of it? Odd fact, modern researchers have studied how certain crystals and minerals remember stress. It's called hysteresis, a kind of physical memory where past events affect how something behaves later, even after conditions change. Rocks don't think, but sometimes they respond. You look at the fossil. It's rock now, sure, but it used to move. It used to walk beneath skies that withheld. It evolved not to hope, but to recall. To reconstruct storms from fragments in the air. A pressure here, a silence there. What if the skull was never just a tool? What if it was a library? Historians still debate whether fossils can retain environmental records beyond chemical residue. Trace isotopes of past climates. Yes, but memory. That's harder to prove. Still, a few fringe researchers argue that complex internal structures, especially in cranial fossils, might preserve acoustic or vibrational patterns if the mineralization process is gentle enough. Basically, if the skull fossilized slow enough and wasn't shattered, it might not just show us what the dinosaur looked like. It might show us what it heard. And that's when you do something absolutely ridiculous. You lie flat on your back beside the fossil, head tilted, so your temple touches the skull. Then you close your eyes. You match your breath to what you think the creature's rhythm was. Long inhale, hold. Long exhale, pause. Inhale again. You slow your body to its extinct tempo. And then you hear it, not a sound, a shape, a sense of volume shifting not in your ears but behind them. A pulse that expands without moving, like being inside a bell that hasn't rung yet. You sit up dizzy. Not scared, just startled, like you stood up too fast in someone else's dream. You realize something else. This wasn't a tool the dinosaur used. This was a part of it, a feedback loop. The skull didn't just help it find storms, it became one. It walked through the desert not just to water, but as water. It reshaped itself into the storm it needed. The creature was a forecast with legs. Every breath it took filtered air for signs of hope. Every ridge in its face was tuned like an organ pipe to resonate with a different wind. And the water it stored, that was just the physical byproduct. The real treasure was the signal. This was a dinosaur that listened itself into survival. You wonder how many died trying. You wonder how many tried to evolve the same trick but didn't get there fast enough. How many wandered with half-formed nasal coils, incomplete bone ridges, skulls too heavy or too fragile. This creature wasn't the first to try, just the last to get it right. And when it died, it didn't vanish. Its bones kept the shape of listening. Here's your brain-softening joke. If humans had evolved the same way, we'd have entire universities dedicated to teaching skull resonance. Professors tapping their heads to predict whether it's going to rain on Friday. Meteorology majors crying into barometric pressure charts. Honestly, not that different from now. You laugh, just once, then stop. Because you finally understand the most unnerving part. The skull might still be doing it, still collecting, still resonating, still holding patterns from ancient storms and letting them echo just faintly into the present. Not because it wants to, but because it can't stop. It was designed not just to survive, but to remember survival. You place your hand on the fossil one last time. The warmth is fading now, not gone, but receding, like it's tired, like it's finally allowed to rest. You whisper, "You did your job." And for the first time, the wind answers, not loud, not even direct. Just a slow swirl around the skull, picking up a few grains of sand, twisting them gently, then letting them go. And you sit with that. Because in the middle of a desert, a fossil just taught you that survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about shape and patience and the quiet magic of being tuned to the sky. You walk away slower this time, not because you're tired, though you are, but because part of you worries that the moment you leave its range, the skull will stop humming, that the warmth will blink out like a switch, that the shape of the storm, the whole point of it all, will forget you. So you look back often, once every few steps, just to make sure it's still there. It always is. That gentle dome in the sand, a listening post for a sky that forgot how to speak. Eventually the land flattens. The dunes roll smooth again. No more tracks, no more fragments, just heat and the shimmer of distance. And that's when the truth hits you like a wall of still air. This dinosaur never stood a chance. Not really. It didn't go extinct in a blaze of fire or some cinematic predator attack. No meteor, no screams, just emptiness. Long, slow, unfair emptiness. The kind that kills gradually. One storm that doesn't arrive, then another, then 100 more. You stop walking, you sit, and you let that grief move through you. Because what kind of animal designs itself so beautifully to survive, only to be betrayed by the very thing it was built to love? It's a cliche to say evolution is cruel, but this feels different. This feels personal. Imagine shaping yourself to dance in the rain, and then rain stops being a thing. Odd fact. There's a frog in Central America that lays its eggs only in rain-filled bromeliads high in the canopy. No puddles, no streams, just those tiny plant cups. The moment those plants start disappearing due to drought or habitat loss, the frogs vanish too. Not with drama, just with a quiet, perfect design that no longer applies. This dinosaur, same deal. It was engineered not by a creator but by time to intercept the exact form of vapor in dry air. It wasn't built for chaos. It wasn't built for abundance. It was built to thrive on just enough. And when the climate shifted, when the air stopped even pretending to carry rain, that wasn't just extinction. That was betrayal. Historians still debate whether this animal vanished during a sudden drought cycle or over a longer stretch of aridification. Some models suggest the desert grew slowly. Others point to evidence of abrupt ecological collapse. But all agree this dinosaur's time ended not because it was weak, but because the atmosphere changed its rules. That's the heartbreak. Because you know it still tried. It still walked, still tilted its skull, still hummed. Right to the end. A creature like this doesn't fail quickly. It fails gloriously. It leaves behind a cathedral of a skull. A fossil still warm 1,000 millennia later. Bone architecture so specific it defies classification, function fused with hope. An instrument made not for song, but for listening to the possibility of song. And isn't that what we do too? We shape ourselves around maybes, around half chances, around echoes of what might be. Love, rain, memory. We're not that different, we just sweat more. Here's your melancholy joke. If you gave this dinosaur a TED Talk slot, it'd stand on stage, stare at the ceiling, and wait for the humidity to rise. The audience would cry and not know why. You chuckle under your breath. Then you look out at the horizon, and for a moment, just a flicker, you see it. A mirage. Maybe. But you swear you see a shape moving. Upright, slow, long tail trailing behind, skull lifted, not toward you, toward the clouds that aren't there. And behind it, smaller shapes. Not followers this time, echoes. They move without weight, without shadow, just suggestion. You blink. They're gone, but the feeling stays. Because that dinosaur didn't just leave behind bones, it left behind an impression. In sand, in air, in the memory of clouds, and in you. You rise, shoulders, sore head buzzing. You know now that the skull didn't store rain. Not exactly. It stored the idea of rain, the memory of what could be, and in doing so it gave shape to hope. You begin walking again, no more glancing back, not because you've forgotten it, but because now you carry it forward. You don't speak for a long time. There's no one to hear you anyway, just the sky, and it's terrible at conversation. The desert flattens out ahead, washed in gold and pale gray, like someone desaturated the world and left you in the margins. You can't see the fossil anymore. It's behind a low ridge now, but you know exactly where it is down to the degree. You feel it in your chest like a second pulse that hasn't stopped beating. And that's when you feel it. Not rain, not even wind, but pressure. Low, steady, and ancient, like a weather front that's been walking behind you silent as breath. Your ears pop gently and a strange thought lands. Maybe the skull wasn't humming. Maybe the desert was, all along, and the fossil was just the last thing that knew how to hear it. You stop walking, just to listen, and the silence around you bends, not loudly, not theatrically, just slightly, a curve in the quiet, like something being replayed at a speed you can't follow. And maybe that's the truth of it. This animal, this desert-dwelling barometer with a cathedral skull, didn't just adapt to weather, it co-authored it. Every step it took was part of a feedback loop. Pressure dropped, skull vibrated, creature moved, the atmosphere adjusted, and on and on. Historians still debate whether early atmospheric systems were influenced by migratory megafauna. It's a stretch, they say. But there's some evidence barely enough to count that large-scale animal movement may have nudged storm paths, especially over open plains. So what if this dinosaur didn't just predict rain? What if it helped create the conditions for it? You stare up at the sky again. It's blue, but it's not cheerful. It's indifferent. Still, you whisper, remember, not to yourself, not to the clouds, to it. Because the shape of its skull is now burned into your memory like sun behind your eyelids. You see those spiral nasal chambers when you close your eyes. You hear the hum when you breathe too slowly. You imagine the bone warming, not because it's alive, but because some fragment of climate itself got stuck inside it. Odd fact. There are frogs in Alaska that survive freezing winters by stopping their hearts. Completely. Their blood turns to slush. But when spring comes, they thaw and live again. You wonder if memory can do that too. If the fossil left here for 10 million summers wasn't dead, just frozen, and you, walking into it at the right angle, breathing just the right way, maybe you woke it. Or maybe not. Maybe you just matched its rhythm. That's all it ever wanted, really. To be understood, to be heard. Not by thunder, not by scientists, but by someone. Even if just for a moment. You think back to that final kneel, the spiral in the sand. You realize now it wasn't trying to rest. It was trying to write something. With its body, with its shape, with the way it turned to face a rain that never came. A story not in language, but in alignment. It said, here is where the storm should be. And now, you are the last thing alive that remembers how that message was shaped. So you sit again. One last time. You draw a circle in the sand with your finger, then another inside it, then a line from the center out bending upward. You don't label it. You don't need to, because the skull carried rain in its hollow. And now you carry the map it made. You think about what it means to die full of something, not regret, not fear, but form. The shape of survival carried just long enough to pass it on, not through genes or language, but through fossilized listening. You rise, and you don't look back again. Because the story is behind you now, yes, but more importantly, it's underneath you. And you walk softer now. Because something in the sand is still listening, and it remembers how the rain was supposed to fall. Out in the whispering stillness of a forgotten desert, you came across a fossilized skull, one unlike any other. Warm humming and impossibly intricate, it revealed a prehistoric creature shaped not by dominance or speed, but by patience and thirst. This dinosaur didn't wait for rain, it intercepted it. Its skull was a living weather instrument. Spiraled nasal chambers condensed moisture stored behind the eyes in vascular hollows, and filtered through bone structures tuned to vapor and pressure. But more than that, it listened. Not to prey, not to threat, but to clouds that failed to rain. Its life was a slow pursuit of storms that died mid-air. Its legacy, a fossil that may still resonate with the memory of water. You followed its trail across the dunes through followers, a spiral death, and a burial by sand, and felt the echoes of something ancient stir awake. The creature didn't just adapt. It gloriously failed, designed to hear and hold water in a world that eventually went dry, but even in extinction it endured. Its skull remained tuned still, catching faint whispers of the weather it once knew. And now you, a lonely human in a modern age, have become its final chorus. You carry the shape of the storm it died remembering.